Hello there everyone, and welcome back to Void War Studios for our 40k episode. Right then, so, we last looked at the Imperial Guard and Tau, so I'm going to continue on with looking at the Imperial Guard, and if I've got time I'll try and make a Tau video as well, because I love you guys. And we hit 130 subscribers last I checked, and that's pretty amazing. I can only say thank you to everyone for that, because this channel growing is, well, essential, necessary, and frankly amazing. I'm genuinely appreciative and really proud of all that's been happening. So again, thank you all so much. So, the Imperial Guard. We're going to look at their famous regiments as well as the general command structure, because I didn't really touch on that last time, did I? So, how does this all work then? Well, in theory, the Imperial Guard receive their orders from the Lord Commander of the respective segmentum. Each part of the galaxy is divided up into segmentums, essentially grid coordinates for various parts of the galaxy. These Lord Commanders are enacting the commands of, in theory, the High Lords of Terror, who will give the various Imperial Guard armies their commands. But Imperial bureaucracy being what it is, this can either be missed, forgotten, it can be ignored, or it can just take ages for things to actually happen. The Imperium is a bit of a lumbering beast when it comes to actually getting stuff done. Eventually, however, they will find the correct piece of paperwork which has all the approvals stamped on it, and then the Lord Commander will find a suitable commanding officer to direct the campaign. And depending upon the nut, often depends on what kind of commander is sent to the particular battlefield in question. And this selection process can be many ways. It can result in honour duels, it can result in diplomatic votes, it can result in a group of commanders essentially joining together to actually enact a campaign. But officer class being what it is, some of them are, trying to do underhanded things to one another, and you get the idea. Frankly, it's a kind of a miracle that stuff actually gets done, ever. And then you haven't even started talking about Department Ministorum, the people who actually own most of the guns, tanks, and equipment you're going to need. And then you've got to talk to everyone else who's going to be going on this campaign. You've got to get the Commissars involved, you have to get the Imperial Navy, you've got to get the Air Force, you've got to get all the ground troops recruited, you've got to get them supplied, you've got to make sure they get there, you've got to... oh god, so many things before you can even enact the goddamn campaign. But eventually, it all gets gathered together, and they set off for their conquest, or defence, depending on the situation. Now that I've kind of gone into how nuts it is trying to even get an Imperial Guard unit to a location, I'm now going to talk about the most famous regiments, the ones that stand out in the Imperium, because for your own Imperial Guard army, frankly, there are so many worlds in the Imperium, your Imperial Guard can take up virtually any form you like. There are Imperial Guardsmen who basically use single-shot las guns and look like something out of the American Civil War. There are Imperial Guardsmen who look like they've just stepped off of the scene of Terminator. There are some regiments that look like they might have stepped out of a fetish club of a sort. There are Imperial Guard units who look like they stepped out of the Dark Ages, wielding axes and crude weapons rather than preferring to use las guns and high-tech stuff. You've got Imperial Guardsmen who have really high-tech weapons. You've got Imperial Guardsmen who essentially have mini jetpacks. You have Imperial Guardsmen who love using tunnel fighting. You have Imperial Guardsmen who love ambushes. The numbers of different flavours and different regiments is, frankly, up to your imagination. But I think it's only fair we start with the most famous, common, and frankly most sold Imperial Guard unit in Games Workshop, the Cadian Imperial Guard. And I'm not going to lie, when I first saw how this army's name was spelt when I was but a boy, I kept thinking they were Canadian Imperial Guard, which amuses me to no end in retrospect. Also known as Cadian Shock Troops, these guys hail from the planet of Cadia. If you've heard anything about the recent shenanigans that have been going on in 40k, yeah, that's the planet that Abaddon threw a black fortress into and, mostly destroyed it. Although we have recently learned the planet is still there, just in a bit of a crumpled, broken mass, shall we say. But before Cadia was basically made into an inhospitable, unlivable planet, even by the standards of the 41st millennium, Cadian shock troop regiments were renowned as being highly disciplined and being expert marksmen. In fact, Cadians were taught to essentially strip, reassemble and shoot lasguns by the time they could walk. And Cadian regiments were also known for being pretty well equipped for the average Imperial Guardsman, and also, because they're trained from such a young age, being pretty damn decent at obeying orders and doing as they're told. In fact, Cadians were, and for the most part still are, the most numerous Imperial Guard regiment in the galaxy. Frankly, because Cadia just produced so many of the blooming things, because of Cadia's location. When you're right in front of the Eye of Terror, you need every single human you can get your hands on to know exactly how to fire a lasgun and be able to do it effectively, quickly, and without panicking when a Chaos Space Marine comes charging towards them. A very difficult feat to pull off for the average human, I'm not gonna lie. And Cadian officers were well used to the various doctrines of combat which tended to involve tactical uses of tanks, troops, aircraft, and, well, basically being able to outthink and outmaneuver the opponent, as well as having a traditional Cadian stubbornness that was quite famous across the galaxy. In fact, the only real weakness, besides, being squishy humans in a galaxy full of aliens, gods, monsters, and, well, everything in between, the only real weakness that Cadian regiments tended to have was a issue with being by the book, shall we say. A Cadian regiment isn't going to do anything unless commanded to, and whilst they are capable, of course, of a little bit of initiative, they prefer to stick to their command structure, which, if taken by surprise, tends to mean that their commanding officers struggle to cope. So, depending upon the foe, maybe you want to change to a different regiment, but when everything looks like a nail, the Cadians make a fantastic hammer. The Armageddon Steel Legion are a very different kettle of fish to the Cadians. Being equally as well equipped, the Armageddon Steel Legion has a bigger preference towards mechanized infantry and combined armed assaults. And the reason for this is actually based on where they are from. Armageddon is a radioactive hellhole, and I mean that without any sarcasm whatsoever. Basically, if you're outside and you're not wearing a gas mask and a really, really good coat, you're going to melt because of acid rain, poisonous fumes. Yeah, you just don't step outside unless you absolutely have to and you're wearing the correct equipment. Armageddon is essentially a world that is an industrial centre, and as such it meant that everything around just kind of withered, died, got radioactive and became hazardous for the local wildlife. And because of this, the Armageddon Steel Legion do have a love of wandering around in chimera transports and using tank regiments, rather than big mass infantry assaults. They can do it, of course, but the way their army is structured tends to lead more to having a chimera transport the troops across the battlefield. And this does mean that the Armageddon Steel Legion is very mobile, very quick at getting into different locations, and also very hardy because they are used to some pretty inhospitable environments, and they have all the kit and training and life experience to know how best to cope with this. In fact, even the Armageddon Steel Legion's vehicles are properly and fully airtight containers, simply because the planet they come from is just so damn hazardous. If you want to send these guys into a particularly hazardous war zone where the literal environment is a danger, then yeah, I would definitely recommend sending in the Steel Legion, because you'll have plenty of heavy armour to back you up, and these guys are used to, well, pretty unpleasant environments. The Vostroyan Firstborn are again a very different regiment from all the other Imperial Guard regiments, in that every single one of them is made up of the firstborn child of a Vostroyan family. This came about because of an unfortunate choice during the Horus Heresy. Essentially, during one of the darkest times of the heresy, the Vostroyan homeworld, Vostroya, decided that it would not provide men, military and material towards the war effort during the Horus Heresy, essentially saying that the loss of manpower would be too great and the planet would fall. When the heresy was over, the Imperium was understandably very, very, very angry with the Vostroyan army. However, in an act of mercy, and to repay their debt to the Emperor, the Vostroyans were allowed to continue. Frankly, this is an amazing circumstance because under any other situation, most planets would have been exterminatus and declared traitors for just, not being involved in the war. However, they must have been pretty damn loyal before the Horus Heresy, because they were allowed to remain under one condition. The Vostroyans were told for the next 10,000 years they were to give up their firstborn for the Imperial Guard's service. There is no exception to this rule whatsoever. Doesn't matter if you're basically a baker and your firstborn is a little girl, yep, they are destined for the Imperial Guard. Doesn't matter if you're a noble with all the money, wealth and luxuries you can afford on Vostroya, which is a very wealthy planet, you are heading for the Imperial Guard. You don't have a choice. This is the oath that all Vostroyans have made. However, due to the honourable and very loyal aspect of the Vostroyans, in hindsight, they don't view this as a punishment, more as a solemn duty, and it makes Vostroyans so stubborn and renowned for this stubbornness when in serious situations that they're one of the hardest Imperial Guard regiments to dig out when they decide to dig in. The firstborn regiments are trained in all manner of adverse conditions, mostly thanks to the fact that the planet they are from is so damn frickin' cold and has many inhospitable and dangerous environments to train in. As Vostroya has an interesting relationship with the Mechanicus, this has meant that their uniforms are this wonderful red, and they also have very neat equipment, much better than the standard Imperial Guardsmen, even better than Cadians. Bionic replacements and cyber augmentations are relatively common, which is very, very unusual for a regiment, because, well, most humans aren't deemed worth the price to keep alive. However, Vostroyans is a very different matter altogether, thanks to that lovely cozy relationship they have with the Mechanicus. In fact, many Vostroyans undergo the surgery whether they need it or not for a cybernetic arm, leg, eye, whatever, simply because they love technology. They actually are very, very keen on it, unlike many other planets. The weapons by Vostroyans are also interesting and unique, each one considered an heirloom and passed down from father to son to daughter, whichever, through the generations. Hand-carved wooden stocks, silver and gold inlays, various beautiful utility bits that have just been added during the generations. And the Vostroyans take this burden and make it into an honour to continue to fight for the Imperial Guard. And yeah, this combination of fairly high technology, stubbornness and a willingness to fight for the Emperor means Vostroyans are a formidable Imperial Guard regiment and can bring all manner of fun toys to the table. I'm talking plasma guns, las cannons, melter guns, all kinds of fun equipment that some Imperial Guard regiments would find harder to get hold of than others. And don't even get me started on their tanks, artillery. Yeah, Vostroyans are a wonderful, smart-looking regiment. Look at those furry hats. Gotta love those furry hats. Snappy dresses, beautiful moustaches, and furry hats. What's not to love? And from one very snappy dressed regiment to another, the Mordian Iron Guard. I used to have an army of Mordian Iron Guards, which I found fantastic fun to paint. I just wasn't a big fan of sitting back and shooting. It's just not my playstyle. But anyway, the Mordian Iron Guard. Hailing from their home planet of Mordia, which is a planet basically in eternal night because the other side is too close to the sun, and yeah, you die if you go to the other side. The Mordians are famous for looking really, really smashing in their uniforms, for walking in perfect regimental lines, and for being even more stubborn than Vostroyans, which is quite an impressive feat, and also having absolutely no sense of humour. And I'm not entirely kidding on the no sense of humour bit, because Mordians are sent to planets that are more often than not likely to revolt, because a Mordian Iron Guard regiment will happily mow down civilians and look fantastically impressive walking shoulder to shoulder with their colleagues. In fact, Mordians are so well trained in rank fire, aka the old-fashioned Civil War method of firing guns, where you have a group of people crouched in front, another group behind, and then a group behind that they can do this ranked mass volley fire with such amazing speed and precision. Yeah, you just don't want to charge into Mordian Iron Guard regiment that are mass firing. It's just not a very smart move. Even Chaos Space Marines are going to get a little singed trying to get to them. But yeah, what makes Mordian Iron Guard so, amazing, besides the fancy uniforms. The Iron 10th, which is a famous tank regiment, in conjunction with their fantastic rifle fire, and the fact that Mordians are one of the few Imperial Guard regiments that really don't need commissars, just because they're just that fanatically loyal and that stubborn that really a commissar would probably be looked down on by the other Mordians. As strange and unusual as that may sound. They are not considered the most creative of fighters. They are very straightforward. They like to forward in big ranks and fire their lasguns into the enemy, as well as, sending in tank regiments to blast things that are bigger to smithereens. So I wouldn't say they were the most imaginative regiment, but if you want something thoroughly shot to pieces and you want to have a regiment that you know won't turn traitor, then I would probably choose the Mordians. And although those dress uniforms do not look like they offer much protection, underneath is the wonderful flak jackets that all Imperial Guard regiments tend to use. Even the one we're about to talk about now have, flak vests, I think is the most generous thing we can call them. And these are not Imperial Guard who like to stand in neat little lines and try to shoot things. These are Imperial Guardsmen who like to sneak up on you and stab you in the neck. The Catachan Jungle Fighters. Hailing from the world of Catachan, these wonderful, wonderful Rambo impersonators are some of the biggest badasses the Imperial Guard can call upon. And I'm not saying that with too much sarcasm. The Catachans are famous for ambush and hit-and-run assaults. They are an Imperial Guard regiment who like to move quickly, who like to move silently, and ideally like to get as close as possible before unloading all hell on the unfortunate enemy. This is not a regiment that you employ in a standard battlefield situation. This is a regiment that you use to outmaneuver, outflank, and cause all kinds of problems. Due to the nature of the planet they're from, it being a jungle death world, and I will get to talking about different classifications for planets at some point, but essentially, a death world is the worst place possible to be. It's a planet that's actively hostile in almost every conceivable way. Heck, on Catachan, the jungle is literally trying to eat you and has to be burnt away with fire on a regular basis to stop the cities from being swallowed up in it. If you want an army that is wonderfully muscular, loves close quarters combat, as well as sneaking up on your opponent, then the Catachans are the boys and girls for you, and they will gladly place a large serrated blade through anyone as quietly as possible and murder everyone in sight. Again, this is another one of these Imperial Guard regiments that, whilst it can have commissars, law-wise speaking, Catachans find commissars more of a hindrance than a help, because the average commissar isn't nearly as quiet as a Catachan or knows how to move as quickly. And on Catachan, if you're not good at moving quiet and moving fast, you're gonna be dead. And now we come to an army that is so different from the Catachans, it's borderline hilarious. The Death Corps of Krieg. Another Imperial regiment with a very interesting history, but as this is a brief video into the different regiments, I won't get too deeply into it. Let's just say there was a bit of an ooh-ah on their planet of Krieg, and the war broke out, and, the planet is now more or less inhospitable, and the only thing the planet can provide are soldiers. Luckily, the Krieg, or Kriegers, as they're often known, are so used to warfare on their own planet that, they became amazing warriors on almost every other planet. Used to dangerous environments, and also being clad in wonderful coats and beautiful gas masks, this army has a fetish for heavy artillery that borderlines on the disturbing, and a love for dying for the Emperor, although, let's be clear, this is dying for the Emperor with purpose. A Krieger doesn't just suicidally die for the Emperor. Well, they do, but they only do it if they feel there's a genuine gain to be had. They're not going to waste soldiers, they're going to sacrifice them in a productive fashion, which is a very complicated line to balance on, not gonna lie. And due to the nature of the home planet of Krieg, where, frankly, it's one of the most miserable places on the planet, even Catachan has a sense of humour to it. They have a morbid sense of humour. The Kriegers are even more morbid, and gung-ho attitude, like the Catachans, is not something the Kriegers do. Kriegers love following orders, they love marching across battlefields with lasguns, and they also have lots of fancy engineer corps who do all kinds of fun things. But it's their artillery that Kriegers are so in love with. The preferred method for a Krieg army to fight in is essentially a siege situation. The Kriegers will line up all their wonderful heavy artillery pieces and tank formations and blast whatever is in the way to absolute smithereens. This is an army that loves the heavy guns. Absolutely loves them. And again, to a very different regiment, the Talan Desert Raiders. No, this isn't the Taliban, I absolutely assure you, although they do love their guerrilla warfare tactics. The Talan Desert Raiders basically came about because their home planet, which was a much more hospitable place before the Horus Heresy broke out, since the Horus Heresy, the planet of Talan became essentially a desert wasteland. And I'll get into that if people want me to do a Talan faction focus video. But anyway, the Talan Desert Raiders specialise in ambush-style warfare, knowing how best to hide themselves in deserts and, well, pretty unhospitable environments. So if they're on a particularly hot planet, the Talans are probably a pretty good bet. You can pretty much trust a Talan regiment to more or less do whatever it likes. Just give them some general instructions, tell them that the enemy is there, you want them dead, and the Talan will basically take them apart piece by piece by piece, setting up ambushes, doing traps, raiding supply lines. The Talans are fantastically mobile, thanks to their special breed of horses, which I also should remember that the Kriegers also have a very special breed of warhorse, but I will get into that in their own video. But the Talan are famous for being able to hit, run, hide, and really frustrate the enemy trying to find them. And they do have various mechanized elements to help them move around the desert and, well, terrain more effectively. This is definitely a regiment that doesn't like standard warfare because, well, it's just not their natural means of fighting. They can do it, of course, as every Imperial Guard regiment can, but their favourite way of fighting is by picking an enemy apart piece by piece. Not winning a battle in one engagement, but basically cutting an army into small chunks and then just eating them at their leisure, making them a very frustrating regiment to potentially fight against. And now to a regiment which, I swear to God, is possibly the most unlucky regiment in the entire Imperium. The Valhallan Ice Warriors. Hailing from the world of Valhalla, a wonderful name for a planet if I do say so, the Valhalla Ice Warriors have a bit of a grim history. The planet itself is pretty inhospitable, it's an ice world, so it's damn cold, but to cap it all off, their method of warfare is grueling trench siege style warfare, and their planet got invaded by greenskins, and they're constantly trying to shoot them down and drive them back. Now, there are many Imperial worlds who have greenskin populations, frankly because once a greenskin warg lands on a planet, even if you destroy the majority of the warg, their orc spores are going to constantly reform unless you basically burn the place to a crisp. But on Valhalla that's a little tricky due to the whole ice thing. It's very hard for any kind of technology to survive long on Valhalla, simply because it's so damn cold. And oil and petroleum basically just freezes, and it becomes utterly useless. And for this reason, Valhallan's style of warfare is typically manpower centric, shall we say. Valhallans are so grim and determined in their siege-style warfare that their attrition losses are frankly ridiculous, but it's a testament to their stubbornness, grim resolve, and frankly determination never ever to back away that means that they are famous for holding objectives really well. If you want a regiment that's going to hold a location and make absolutely damn sure the enemy pays for it, then a Valhallan Ice Warrior regiment isn't a bad shout. And, well, their commanders often have the unfortunate attitude that, well, there are more Valhallans where that last couple thousand came from, and so they tend to throw them into the big old meat grinder if they're ever on the offensive. And again, you gotta love an army that have furry hats. Anyway, that was my pick of some of the Imperial Guard regiments. There are a lot more that I have not covered, but I figured I would just cherry pick the more famous ones and the ones that have models in the GW range. Well, more models than other regiments in the DW range, I shall say. I'm hoping that in this edition the Imperial Guard will get some kind of new kit, even if it's just mixed gender regiments, simply because the Imperial Guard don't give no damn if you're male or female, they'll take you. And yeah, there are plenty of stories of Imperial Guard regiments having children in those regiments, and those children also growing up to join Imperial Guard regiments. So yeah, it's a very equal opportunity career path, shall we say. I hope you've all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to hear from you all soon. Check out the Facebook page, maybe have a look at Patreon, and keep following the channel. Take care, everyone.